If we start with the New menu item from the File menu, from this screen we see that we have the ability to choose to create a new project, empty project or instrument driver project. For now, let's talk about the empty project. When we click OK, this window appears. This is our project window. It's important to understand that there are two key tabs within the project window, Items and Files. Items show links to various files within our project. Those files can either be VIs, or controls, or global variables, or support files, or even hyperlinks, as we'll see. The purpose of the project screen is to show us the entire hierarchy of individual files and VIs which are used by our project, and allow us to easily view them and manipulate them as necessary. Before we perform a tour of the screen, let's just save our project. Now that we've saved our project, we can proceed with a quick tour of the screen. Let's take a quick look at the toolbar here. Here we see our new item. If we pop this up, we see our standard new dialog box, and here we have the ability to choose any type of structure or template or VI. Let's just for now create a blank VI. And notice here we have a checkbox to add to project. So now we have our entitled VI created. We can write code for it as required. And we can see when we refer back to the project that Untitled 1 has automatically been added to our project. And it's under the My Computer item, meaning that this resides on my computer. One of the more advanced capabilities of the Project Explorer is that it allows us to view VIs which need to run or be deployed on multiple systems, including real-time systems and so on. So if we return to our VI and we save it, then we notice that the name has automatically been updated in the Project Explorer. What's important to understand here is that the Project Explorer contains a link to our first VI. We can go ahead and close it. The project, My Project, does not contain any files. It merely contains a series of links to those files. If I were to examine the directory containing My Project, we'll see here that it contains the lvproj file, plus a .aliases file, which LabVIEW automatically creates and maintains, which actually contains the key information allowing the project file to point to each of the sub-VIs. Plus, our first VI, which we just created, has been created and by default saved into the My Project directory. Using this method, using the new, we can add various types of templates, design patterns, controls, global variables, and so on. For example, if I wanted to add a standard state machine, then we'll see that the standard state machine template is generated. What's important to understand here is in addition to the VI which is created as part of the standard state machine, there also is a type def which is automatically created. And what's interesting here is that when we close and save the standard state machine, it prompts us to save each of the individual files, including the type def control. And each of these has been added to the project. So we see how our standard state machine 2 VI has automatically been added to the project. In addition, if we expand the dependencies section, we see how the control, which this state machine 2 refers to, has automatically been added there as well. So we can see the power of the project screen. Whenever we include a VI which contains either controls or sub-VIs, each of those sub-VIs or controls is automatically added into the dependencies section. Again, if we took a look at the Files tab, we see a list of all the files and where they reside on our hard drive. And if we refer again to the folder on the hard drive, we see that each of those files is there as well. Let's continue with our tour of the project screen. The next menu item is the Open folder. If we were to open this, then we see we have the ability to choose a VI or a control or any other type of LabVIEW project or library. So let's select this particular VI, the multi-line string with idle. We've opened it, we see it appears in the screen, and this is the example we created a while back in the state machine section. But we notice here that this has two important sub-VIs, the getNextStep and the combinedString sub-VIs. Because we've opened it, we haven't explicitly added it to our project. It appears here under the Dependencies section under Items in Memory. See here how we have multi-line string with idle, plus the two sub-VIs and their sub-VI, all of which are dependent upon this particular VI. If I were to move this VI now into our project, notice how the dependencies have moved from in memory to be now part of the Dependencies section. I can save this project now. Now let's investigate the files. We see here that although all of these VIs and controls appear to be part of the same project, which they in fact are, on the Files tab, we see that they're actually in separate directories. We see that the multi-line string with idle folder is in the root of C, and the My Project containing the other ones are separate in the root of C. This is fine, and there's not necessarily a problem with this particular approach. We'll see that it's very easy when we attempt to distribute the source code or back it up, to back up the My Project directory, but inadvertently forget to do the multi-line string with idle folder. So for that reason, even though the Project Explorer makes it very easy for us to add and view and manage where all our files are, it's not a bad idea to make sure that we have a structure where everything that we need to use is properly contained within one main directory. If we do that, then it's easy to back up that entire directory simply by creating a zip or by taking that directory to an external hard drive or adding it to our automated backup system. We'll come back to that point in a moment. Continuing now across the toolbar, we have the ability to save all, which will not only save the project, but if we have any changes in any of our VIs or controls, it will save them as well. Plus we have the standard cut, copy, paste, and delete or remove from project, which allows us to manipulate and duplicate each of our controls and our VIs within our project. It's important to understand that remove from project does not delete the file from the hard drive. Next, we have the ability to open a new project, save just the project without saving any of the individual sub-VIs, filter the project view, which chooses whether or not we see the dependencies and or the build specifications. Next, project properties, which when we pop this up, gives us project description, the ability to set conditional disable symbols, and source control. The conditional disable symbols and the source control are beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about in this course, but it's important to point out where they are. Next, there are a series of options that are disabled at this time that allow us to help debug, maintain, and package up our projects. Here, resolve conflicts will allow us to take care of problems that can occur when VIs are cross-linked. Also, we have the ability to build, build selected, and run from build. These options are involved with creating executables. Depending on the package of LabVIEW you have, you may have the ability to build applications. This is something we're going to discuss in a later section, but it's important to understand now that all of application building is done from the Project Explorer screen. In particular, from adding items under the Build Specifications section. In addition, there are source code control options, which again, depending on your configuration and whether you're using source code control, allow you to check in, check out, and add files to your source control applications. The next thing to point out is that if we right-click anywhere in our project, we have the ability to access a context menu, which allows us to simply access a variety of the options for New File, or also the Add submenu. The Add submenu allows us to add files, folders, and also hyperlinks directly into our project. Let's take a moment now and talk about the two options for adding folders. When we add a folder in snapshot mode, what that does is it adds all of the files which are contained within that folder into our project. What's important to understand, and the reason it's called a snapshot, is that if we later modify the files contained within that folder, the files in our project do not update. In this way, we must be very careful if we're using the snapshot option to not expect new files to automatically be added to our project. The auto-populating option, when we add a folder, does exactly that. It adds a link to a folder, and then any modifications we make to the files in that folder, whether that's removing or adding new files, will automatically be added to our project. This is a very important point when we're building a project from the ground up and we begin adding a lot of VIs and functionality into our project. As a quick general discussion about the usage of the Project Explorer, it's up to your individual preference as to whether or not you use this screen. If you are going to build applications, you have no choice but to use the Project Explorer, at least at the very end of your project development, in order to actually build the application. However, many developers choose to use the Project Explorer from the very beginning, whenever they start a new project. And whenever you create a new VI, you can do it directly from the project screen. And if you choose this route, anytime you add a file or create a new VI, you could do it directly from the Project Explorer screen, making sure that every time you do so, it's automatically added to the project. Other developers choose to develop without using the Project Explorer screen and add files to it later. Either way, it's important to structure and plan your project carefully, in particular in the way that you store the files on the hard drive. As we saw here, we have two important VIs within our project residing in completely separate locations. And as mentioned, it would be very easy to back up or make a copy of this entire project and miss one or the other of these individual locations.